I can still feel the hospital bed under me if I think hard enough. The sterile, plastic mattress that stuck to my back, the faint hum of machines keeping track of every fragile breath and beat. My memories of those days are hazy in parts, but some things stick out sharp and clear, like how cold I felt, even with all those blankets. The surgeries, the constant stream of doctors with clipped tones and grave expressions, the nagging thought in the back of my mind that maybe this was it. This could be how it all ended. It started with something small, as it always does. A pain I thought I could shrug off, a minor ache that grew until I couldn't ignore it anymore. Then came the tests, the diagnosis, the hospital stays. I remember looking at Emily's face when we first heard the news. She had this look of shock, like she'd been struck, and I guess I took comfort in that. It made me feel like I was worth something, like she cared. But looking back, I can see there was something else in her eyes too, fear. And maybe that's where things really started to go wrong. We'd been married for almost 10 years at that point. We weren't perfect, but I thought we were strong. We'd made it through job losses, miscarriages, late nights arguing about bills and budgets and plans that never quite seemed to work out. There was love, even if it had settled into something quieter and less thrilling than it was when we first started out. I think we both thought that was normal, the natural progression of things. When I went in for surgery, I remember holding her hand as they prepped me, the soft, cool feel of her fingers slipping away as they wheeled me to the operating room. I remember the way she whispered, "I love you," just before I went under. I think I held on to those words like a lifeline, repeating them to myself in the dark hours that followed, like they could pull me through. I don't know exactly when it happened. When she decided I was a lost cause. Maybe it was during the weeks I spent hooked up to machines, barely able to keep my eyes open, drifting in and out of a morphine haze. Maybe it was after she spent hours sitting by my bedside, watching my chest rise and fall like it was some kind of countdown. I don't know. I doubt she'll ever tell me, and to be honest, I'm not sure I even want to know. But she did decide. Somewhere along the line, Emily looked at me and saw a dying man instead of her husband. She told herself a story that I wasn't coming back, that I was already half gone. And in that story, she found a way out, a new beginning with someone else. I remember the first time I suspected. I was just starting to regain my strength, able to sit up in bed and look out the window. It was a tiny victory, just seeing the sun again, feeling something besides the ache in my bones. Emily came to visit less and less, her excuses piling up, something about work, something about needing to take care of herself so she could be there for me. I swallowed it all because I had no other choice. I was trapped in that bed, a prisoner to my own broken body, trying to keep myself together, trying not to think too hard about the way she didn't meet my eyes anymore. When I finally got out of the hospital, I was still weak. I needed help just to get up the stairs, to shower, to get dressed. And she was there, but she felt distant, like she'd already packed up and left in her mind. I noticed little things, a quick text she'd turn her phone away to answer, a late night out with friends that left her looking guilty when she finally came home. I ignored it because I was just so damn happy to be alive, to have made it back to her. I told myself I was just paranoid, that it was all in my head. I didn't want to believe what I knew was already true. The day I found out for sure, I felt like my heart stopped for the second time in a year. She didn't even deny it. She just looked at me, tears in her eyes, and said she thought I was going to die. She said she didn't know how to face a future alone, that she needed something to hold on to, even if that meant betraying the man she promised to stay with, in sickness and in health. That's when I knew I'd lost her. After that day, everything changed between us. Or maybe it's more accurate to say that I finally saw things as they were. The glass had shattered, and I couldn't piece it back together. I couldn't see Emily the way I used to, couldn't feel that sense of home I'd spent years building with her. All I could see was a stranger, someone who'd chosen herself over us, who had already moved on while I was lying there fighting for my life. But leaving wasn't as easy as it should have been. I'd like to say that I got up and walked out as soon as I learned the truth, that I was strong enough to just let her go, to slam the door on a decade of my life and move on. But it wasn't like that. You don't just erase 10 years, no matter how badly someone has hurt you. It seeps into your bones, ties you up in ways you don't even realize until you try to pull away. I loved her, even then, even in the middle of all that betrayal. And some part of me hated myself for it. For a few months, we lived in this strange limbo, sharing a house but hardly sharing anything else. She would go out more often, and I stopped asking questions. Maybe I didn't want to know the answers, didn't want to hear her lies or her excuses. The worst part was watching her act like nothing was wrong, like she could just slip back into her old routines while I stayed up nights, haunted by the image of her with someone else. The recovery dragged on. My body was healing, but my mind was a mess. I was still weak, and every time I tried to summon the strength to make a decision, I felt like I was fighting myself. There were days when I'd sit in the living room, listening to her move around the house, wondering if she was thinking about him or if she regretted anything. But if she did, she never showed it. She looked at me with pity, maybe guilt, but I could tell that her mind was somewhere else, with someone else. The tipping point came one night when she didn't come home at all. She hadn't even bothered to tell me she'd be out. I spent the whole night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling this hollow ache settle in my chest. It wasn't even anger anymore, it was this deep, aching loneliness, this realization that the woman I'd built my life around had already left me, even if she was still holding on to the pretense of being my wife. And maybe that's what hurt the most, that she couldn't just rip the band-aid off, couldn't give me the decency of a clean break. I was just the dying man she'd stayed with out of some twisted sense of obligation, a ghost she felt guilty about leaving behind. When she finally stumbled in the next morning, looking half surprised to see me awake, something inside me snapped. I told her I couldn't do it anymore, that I wasn't going to keep pretending everything was fine, wasn't going to live like this, constantly wondering if I was some pitiful burden she was stuck with. She didn't argue. She didn't beg me to stay or even apologize. She just nodded, a look of relief flickering across her face that I'll never forget. It felt like a slap, seeing how easy it was for her to let me go, how quickly she accepted that this was over. I'd spent months agonizing over whether to leave, and she just accepted it, like she'd been waiting for me to do it for her. The divorce was quick, barely a blip compared to everything we'd been through together. No drawn-out battles, no fights over money or property. I didn't want anything from her except distance. I took what I could fit into a couple of suitcases and left, grateful for every mile that grew between us. I felt like I'd been freed from something heavy and dark, like I could finally breathe again. And yet, there was this emptiness that followed me, a void I didn't know how to fill. The truth is, I didn't know who I was anymore. My whole identity had been wrapped up in being her husband, in our life together, and now that was gone. I was left standing there, alone, with scars I hadn't even begun to process. I was too tired to think about starting over, too broken to believe I could find something better, but at the same time, I knew I couldn't go back. All I could do was move forward, even if that meant stumbling blindly into whatever came next. After the divorce, I tried to rebuild my life, bit by bit. I started working again, went to therapy, tried to figure out who I was without her. I stopped wearing my wedding ring. I threw out her old notes, her photos, every reminder of the life we'd built together. It felt like cutting away dead skin, painful but necessary. I was trying to heal, to scrape together some version of myself that hadn't been touched by her betrayal. And that's when I met her, Lily. Meeting Lily was something I never saw coming. At that point, I was barely functioning. I went through the motions, waking up, going to work, eating whatever I could muster an appetite for, and coming home to an empty apartment. I wasn't out looking for anyone. Romance felt like a distant, foreign concept, something that happened to other people, people who weren't scarred and jaded like I was. But then there she was, this breath of fresh air I didn't realize I needed. We met in the most mundane of places, a coffee shop around the corner from my apartment. I was sitting in my usual spot, nursing a cup of coffee and staring blankly out the window, lost in thought, when she bumped into me. Literally. She was in a hurry, juggling her phone, a bag, and a coffee, and she stumbled right into my table. Her drink spilled everywhere, including on me. I remember the look of horror on her face, her hands flying to her mouth as she apologized over and over, fumbling for napkins to clean up the mess. I should have been annoyed. Any other day, I probably would have just nodded, shrugged it off, and left. But there was something about her, something disarming in the way she laughed at herself, how flustered she was, how genuine she seemed. She kept apologizing, insisting on buying me a new coffee, and eventually, I gave in, more out of exhaustion than anything else. We sat there, talking in that coffee shop for hours. I didn't mean to tell her anything personal. But somehow, I found myself opening up to her in a way I hadn't with anyone since the divorce. Maybe it was because she didn't know me or my baggage, she wasn't connected to that part of my life. She asked questions, but never pried, never pushed me to share more than I wanted to. She just listened, her eyes kind and open, like she genuinely cared about what I had to say. There was a softness to her, a kind of lightness I'd forgotten existed. She was 15 years younger than me, full of energy and optimism in a way that felt foreign, but also refreshing. At first, I told myself we were just friends, that she was just someone to talk to, someone who helped me forget the weight I'd been carrying. I didn't want to ruin it by expecting too much. And I didn't think she'd ever look at me that way. I mean, why would she? I was older, still healing, still figuring out who I was. She could have been with someone her own age, someone with less baggage, someone who wasn't just learning to breathe again. But somehow, despite all the reasons it shouldn't have worked, it did. Slowly, she became a part of my life, slipping into the spaces I thought were permanently broken. She never judged me for what I'd been through, never looked at me with pity or condescension. She just accepted me, flaws and all. She laughed at my self-deprecating jokes, encouraged me when I stumbled, and gave me the space to talk about my past without making it feel like I was burdening her. It wasn't long before I started feeling something I hadn't felt in years, a strange, hesitant kind of hope. I was terrified of it. I kept waiting for the moment when she'd realize what a mess I was, when she'd see me for who I really was, a man with a failed marriage, a man who'd been left behind, a man who wasn't whole. I kept waiting for her to leave. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed. She was patient with me in a way that didn't make sense, never pushing for more than I could give. She didn't ask for grand gestures or commitments. She just wanted my company, my time, whatever I was willing to share. And that was enough for her. I remember the first time I kissed her. It was almost by accident, this quiet, unexpected moment in my apartment after a long day. She'd come over to bring me soup because I'd mentioned I was feeling under the weather, and we ended up watching some old movie on the couch. She was sitting close to me, her warmth radiating through the thin space between us, and when she turned to say something, I leaned in without even thinking. It was soft, gentle, a tentative brush of lips that felt like a question more than anything. When I pulled back, half apologizing, she just smiled. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no second guessing. She reached out, touching my face, and whispered, "It's okay. I'm here." And that simple reassurance broke something open inside me. I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding back, how afraid I was of letting someone close again. But in that moment, I decided to try. To take a chance, even if it scared the hell out of me. From there, things between us grew naturally, slowly but surely. She became this steady presence in my life, this source of light that made me believe, maybe for the first time, that there was a future beyond my past. With Lily, I felt new. Like the part of me that had died during my marriage, that had withered and broken under the weight of betrayal, was coming back to life. She didn't fix me, she wasn't some miracle cure for the pain I'd been carrying. But she reminded me that I wasn't beyond repair, that I still had something left to give. It was strange, feeling happy again. Part of me kept waiting for it all to fall apart, for the other shoe to drop, for Lily to realize I was too damaged, too old, too much of a mess to be worth her time. But she stayed, never wavering, never making me feel like I was less than what she wanted. And slowly, that fear started to fade, replaced by something warmer, something I'd almost forgotten I could feel. And for the first time in a long time, I began to believe in love again. Loving Lily was different. It felt fragile, like holding something precious in my hands, something I could break if I wasn't careful. I'd been married before, but this was new territory. With Emily, things had been built over time, layered with shared history, woven together by routines and familiar comforts. But with Lily, there was no map, no familiarity to fall back on. Everything felt raw, exposed. I wasn't the young, hopeful man I used to be. I was older, scarred, and aware of just how quickly things could crumble. She knew about my past, of course. I hadn't hidden it from her. One night, early on, I told her everything, about Emily, about the surgery, the betrayal, the years I'd spent trying to put myself back together. I wanted her to know what she was getting into. I wanted her to understand that I was still healing, that I was carrying wounds that hadn't fully closed. I remember watching her face as I told her, looking for signs of judgment or doubt. But she just listened, nodding quietly, her hand resting on mine, her touch gentle and unwavering. After I'd finished, she looked at me and said, "You didn't deserve that. And you don't have to carry it alone anymore." Those words hit me harder than I expected. It was strange, this idea of someone willingly taking on my burdens, someone who didn't see me as damaged goods, who saw something worth loving even in the mess I was. I felt a tightness in my throat, a wave of emotion I'd been holding back for too long. She was offering me something I hadn't let myself hope for, a fresh start, without the shadows of my past hanging over me. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when my insecurities would creep up, ugly and uninvited. I'd catch myself comparing, wondering if she'd see me as an old man who was out of place beside her, or if people around us would look at us and assume she was only with me out of some misguided sense of pity. I was hyper-aware of the age difference, even though she'd never once made me feel self-conscious about it. I'd see the wrinkles around my eyes, the gray starting to pepper my hair, and think, what can I possibly give her that someone younger, fresher couldn't? But Lily never seemed to care. She had this way of looking at me, like I was enough just as I was. Like she didn't see my age, or my scars, or the history I was dragging behind me. She was the kind of person who could make the simplest moments feel meaningful, who would laugh with her whole heart, who saw beauty in things I'd long stopped noticing. She reminded me of what life could feel like when you weren't holding back, when you weren't constantly guarding yourself against disappointment. I'd been so used to walking on eggshells, so afraid of being hurt again, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just be. To trust. To let someone in without expecting them to leave. But Lily had this way of drawing me out, of pulling me into her world, where everything was colorful and unguarded and alive. She showed me that it was okay to hope, that not everyone would turn away when things got hard. Eventually, I knew I wanted more. As terrifying as it was, I wanted a future with her. I wanted something real, something that would last. And I wanted her to know that I wasn't just with her because I was lonely or broken or looking for someone to fill a void. I wanted her because she made me feel whole, because she was the kind of person who made everything brighter just by being there. One evening, as we were sitting on her porch watching the sunset, I took her hand and told her that I loved her. I'd said those words before in my life, but this time, they felt different. Heavier, somehow, because I understood what they meant. I wasn't some wide-eyed kid promising the world without knowing what it took to keep those promises. I was a man who'd seen the other side of love, the painful side, and who knew how rare it was to find someone willing to stay, even when things weren't easy. She looked at me, her eyes shining with something I couldn't quite read, and then she leaned in, resting her forehead against mine. She didn't say anything at first, just let the silence fill the space between us. Finally, she whispered, "I love you too." Her voice was soft, like she was sharing a secret, something fragile that she was trusting me to hold. And in that moment, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was worthy of that trust. We got married a year later, in a small ceremony with just a few close friends and family. I didn't need anything grand or elaborate, just her, standing there with me, promising that we would face whatever came our way together. It was a quiet kind of joy, a happiness that felt solid and real, something I could hold on to. I remember looking at her as she said her vows, feeling this deep sense of gratitude that someone like her could love someone like me, that she could see past all the ways I'd been broken and still choose me. It wasn't the kind of love I'd had before. This was different, quieter, but deeper. It was love that had been forged in the aftermath of pain, built on a foundation of acceptance and understanding. It wasn't about filling a void or healing a wound, it was about building something new, something stronger, together. With Lily, I wasn't haunted by the mistakes of the past. She didn't erase what I'd been through, but she made it feel like it wasn't the only thing that defined me. She gave me hope that there could be more, that I could be more. Standing there with her that day, holding her hand, I realized something that I hadn't allowed myself to believe before, that I was allowed to move on, that I was allowed to be happy again. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally found a place where I could be at peace. It's been a few years now since that day, since Lily and I stood there exchanging vows, promising to love each other through whatever life threw our way. In some ways, it feels like a lifetime ago, in others, like it was just yesterday. Time has a funny way of softening the edges of old wounds, and with Lily, I've been able to finally look back on my past without feeling like I'm drowning in it. My life with her is quiet. Simple, but in the best way. I think, after everything, I'd had enough of grand gestures and complicated love. What we have is steady, honest, and kind. There's this rhythm to it, this natural flow that feels right. We've built something together that's solid, rooted in trust and understanding. With Lily, there's no need for pretenses. I don't have to hide the parts of myself that feel ugly or damaged, because she sees them, knows them, and loves me anyway. Sometimes, when I'm lying next to her in the dark, I find myself thinking back to that hospital bed, to those long, lonely nights where I thought my life was ending. I remember that feeling of helplessness, the disbelief that the person I loved could leave me when I needed her most. I used to be haunted by those memories, used to lie awake replaying them in my head, wondering if I'd somehow deserved it, if there was something broken in me that drove Emily away. But now, those thoughts don't have the same power over me. I look at them, acknowledge them, and then let them drift away, like leaves in the wind. Lily taught me how to do that. She showed me that those moments don't define me, that I'm more than the pain I've been through. She's helped me see myself through kinder eyes, to forgive myself for things I didn't even realize I was holding on to. I've come to accept that my marriage with Emily was a chapter of my life that needed to end. I don't hate her anymore, don't feel the bitterness that used to rise up when I thought of her. I think, in some strange way, she did what she thought was best for herself. She made a choice I'll never fully understand, but that's okay. I don't need to understand it anymore. We were two people who loved each other once, and who couldn't make it last. That's all it is now, a story from another time, another life. And now, here I am, with a woman who's taught me what it means to truly be loved. A woman who stands by me not out of obligation, not out of fear, but out of genuine choice. A woman who, despite the years between us, sees me not as an older man with a past, but as a partner, an equal, someone she wants to share her life with. She's given me a second chance, not just at love, but at finding peace with myself. Sometimes I wonder if people judge us. Maybe they see our age difference and make assumptions, think I'm some middle-aged man trying to relive his youth, or that she's with me for some misguided reason. But those people don't know us. They don't see the way she looks at me, the way she laughs at my stupid jokes, the way she cares for me without expecting anything in return. They don't know how she's been my anchor, my safe place, the person who's shown me what love can be when it's honest and pure. Our life is simple. We spend quiet evenings cooking together, talking about our days, making plans for a future I'd once thought was out of reach. We have small traditions now: Sunday morning hikes, Friday night movies, late night talks on the porch when the world feels still and peaceful. It's not the kind of life that makes headlines, but it's ours, and it's enough. And yet, there are still moments when I find myself overwhelmed by gratitude. It hits me at the most random times, when she smiles at me across the dinner table, when she reaches for my hand as we walk through town, when she rests her head on my shoulder as we fall asleep. It's these little things that remind me of just how far I've come, of how much I've healed. I don't think I would have believed, lying in that hospital bed all those years ago, that I'd end up here, in a life I could finally call my own. People say love finds you when you least expect it, and I guess I'm living proof of that. I'd given up on the idea of happiness, convinced myself that I was too broken to ever be truly loved. But Lily changed that. She saw something in me worth holding on to, something worth believing in, even when I couldn't see it myself. She helped me build a new life from the ruins of the old one, and for that, I'll always be grateful. As I look back now, I don't see my past with bitterness or regret. I see it as something I had to go through to get here, to this place where I can finally breathe easy, where I can finally look forward without feeling like I'm chained to everything that came before. My journey wasn't easy, and there were times when I thought I wouldn't make it through. But here I am, standing on the other side, stronger, wiser, and with a love I never thought I'd find. If I could go back and tell my younger self one thing, I'd tell him to hold on. I'd tell him that there's life beyond the pain, that there's hope even in the darkest moments, and that sometimes, the endings we fear are just the beginning of something better. I'd tell him that he's going to be okay, that he's going to find someone who loves him for all that he is, scars and all. And I'd tell him that, one day, he's going to look back and realize that everything he went through was worth it, because it brought him here, to a love that's true and a peace that's real. As I sit here, with Lily beside me, her hand in mine, I realize that I don't need anything more. I've found my place, my person, my reason to keep going. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be.